Alrighty, I would like to call to order the September 10th, 2024 Auburn, Maine Planning Board meeting. I will start with the first item on the agenda, which is roll call.
Riley Bergeron.
Dave Trask.
Paul Jacques.
Stacy LeBlanc.
Amanda Garrett.
Bob Hayes. Tim DeRoche.
Darren Finnegan.
Excellent. So the next item on the agenda are the meeting minutes. At this time, I would seek a motion to approve or amend the meeting minutes. I think we do have one amendment.
Motion to approve.
Hold on. We'll amend it to say the planning board, the title says planning board agenda, and we just want to amend it to say the planning board minutes. So if all in favor of amending the meeting minutes by just updating the title, I'd seek a motion to approve.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, all those opposed? Oh, you were not there. Thank you, Riley. Thank you. Alrighty, appointment to the Comprehensive Plan Committee. So at this point in time, based on the City Council's directive, we can appoint up to 2 planning board members to attend and join the Comprehensive Plan Committee. So what I guess I would do at this point in time is just open it up for conversation to say who is interested. Okay, we've got one taker.
I have a question, I guess, that if we're allowed, if we can ask a question to staff, I would really, can we do that? Are we allowed to do that? Can we ask staff a question?
Sure, absolutely. It's an open item.
Based on prior experience, Eric, you might have you been around for prior exercises in this and
Yes.
roughly time frame, involvement?
Yeah,
how much of a commitment, from a
we're shooting
time
for
frame?
12 months. I don't think we've ever completed it in 12 months for a full plan rewrite. It usually runs a little longer. I'd say 14 to 18 months is pretty common. It'll be at least a meeting a month, I would say, for most of that period, but there may be times where there's a subcommittee or a second meeting in a given month, but I wouldn't expect that every month.
Does that influence your decision if that's something you'd be interested in?
I'm going to hold for now.
You're going to hold for now. Anyone else interested in it? Anyone? No? Okay, so we've got one interest. Oh, go ahead.
I'll throw my hat in the ring.
Okay, great. All right, so we've got 2 people. Anyone else? All right, so at this point in time, we will vote on each person who is interested. So do we seek a motion?
Yeah, a motion to make the appointment, and I think if there were more than 2 people interested, we could do a separate ballot, but if there's only 2 interested, I think a single vote.
Okay, so I would seek a motion to appoint Riley Bergeron to the Comprehensive Plan Committee.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Great. I would seek a motion to appoint Paul Jacques to the Comprehensive Plan Committee.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent. Great. Perfect.
So what we'll do is pass those 2 motions on to the council, and they'll be added as part of the agenda for the council's official appointment of the full committee.
Okay. Perfect. I appreciate it. All right. So the next item on the agenda is the transportation study update from Jonathan Labonte. You can come to the podium. I wanted to make a joke and be like, you don't have to state your name and your address, and you have more than 5 minutes. This is going to be interesting, I think.
Maybe slow down. No, you are. Just, I wouldn't have.
This one here. Good.
Madam Chair, members of the Planning Board, good to be with you tonight. My name is Jonathan Labonte. I am the city's Transportation Systems Director, which also includes managing the Auburn-Lewiston Municipal Airport and the city's freight intermodal facility. I provided a brief memo. It could have been much, much longer. There's a lot of moving parts, not only in transportation planning by mode, but given the diversity of land uses in Auburn and the impact that transportation can have on achieving the desired outcomes for community growth. I tried to keep it high level, and I'll be happy to answer questions either during the presentation or we can go back. I did include some reference materials if folks like immersing themselves in the connection between land use and transportation, not necessarily endorsing specific approaches that were listed in those links, but it's really good to get you thinking about how laying out transportation can drive some of the community development objectives. There were a couple of studies that I referenced that are, in essence, citywide, or they're regional, and that they're a partnership with the city of Lewiston, using some of our federal highway funds. One of those is a program called Safe Streets and Roads for All. It's a holistic look at crash data across the community to try to drive at achieving what's known as Vision Zero, which is the goal to achieve 0 serious injuries and 0 fatalities on our transportation system. So that study is well underway. We had significant public engagement over the summer. About 400 people between the two cities completed either paper or online surveys, giving feedback about specific areas where they had safety concerns. All of that was geospatial, and we're overlaying that with the known crash data that we have across the community. There will be some further public process this fall. For the planning board specifically as it relates to ordinances, and there was a policy and process component of that review, and we'll be able to share that analysis with you folks. Obviously, any project requiring plan review needs to complete a traffic impact analysis. That's different than a traffic movement permit. For trips over 100 in the peak hour, the city has its own sort of mini traffic movement permit for all projects. Looking at how that's been deployed, how waivers have been granted in the past. Topics like access management. When you think about corridors like Center Street, there aren't a lot of greenfield sites left, but obviously there are opportunities to improve how vehicles enter and exit sites and how that relates to not only traffic on the corridor, but those who may not be in cars traveling. And there is a complete streets ordinance that drives not only the traffic review for projects, but it impacts the capital improvement planning, which obviously all of you are part of that process, giving your recommendations to the council. Give you a sense of sort of the volume of crashes. So this looks over a 10-year period, over 8,000 crashes in Auburn. Over 2,000 of those involved injuries, and there were 22 fatalities. So there's certainly significant work to be done as we look at prioritizing safety and approaches that we can take that are, some may be significant in terms of costs, but a name of this study is to look at low cost, high impact. Can we make smaller investments and greatly improve safety? Another initiative that was referenced is that there's a traffic signal management study. There's a kind of a very high level, you don't have to memorize what the ID numbers for all the signalized intersections, but Auburn has 27 signals. 19 of those, so not the entire system, is networked. So those 8 that aren't part of the network, any programming changes to confirm that the signal timing is right has to be done out in the field versus at a computer server. Right now, AvCog is home to our shared server between Lewiston and Auburn, and we leverage our federal highway funds to keep that system stood up. This evaluation that's underway right now should be done again by fall, is looking at the state of good repair and what our capital planning looks like. There was some significant federal funds brought to Maine to upgrade signal equipment across larger cities. Because we have deferred capital investment in our signals, we were not chosen. Bangor, Lewiston, and Portland are receiving significant funds for capital upgrades. We're trying to get ourselves into a position to compete for those funds. Reviewing of maintenance, timing and coordination is important. That could come up in a traffic movement permit with a project in front of you folks. But there's also things like we'll talk about later. How can you use signal timing to encourage use of Minot Avenue versus Court Street for through traffic, those types of things. And setting a future course, traffic signals are not only expensive to maintain, regular wear and tear, capital upgrades, software that can go wrong. They're not the safest solution at certain types of intersections. So we're also looking at where might signals be in place that don't meet a signal warrant, which is a DOT formula that looks at whether a signal belongs there or not. But also alternatives like roundabouts, where if there are crashes, there is a much lower likelihood of someone being seriously injured in those crashes. Kind of going to work from north to south. It doesn't work perfectly with some of these, but it's mostly maps to orient to some of the discussions that are happening. Some are deep planning. We've got a consultant. There's funding going out the door, paying for consultants. Others we're scoping the review of a more detailed evaluation. One that emerged late summer, the city was approached by Maine DOT about an interest in what they call a road diet. So eliminating some of the travel lanes on Route 4 or Turner Road from about Roy's Hamburgers around Blanchard Road through the town line. Folks may recall that we've made a significant investment in East Auburn at Fair Street. There's a median that limits left turns. There's what they call a jug handle, so you move out of the flow of traffic to position yourself to reverse direction. A very safe option for what was Auburn's most dangerous intersection with respect to fatalities. Just north of that, there's a 5-lane section. Anyone who's traveled that can appreciate, or perhaps wish they didn't appreciate, the rate of speeds through that corridor. So DOT wants to improve safety on all of Route 4. Turner and Livermore are engaged with DOT as well. We've relayed a couple of things to Maine DOT that we would like them to consider and have requested that they negotiate an MOU with the city. One is that simply doing a lane reduction, having one lane in each direction in a center turn lane isn't sufficient with respect to safety, given speeds and how open that corridor is. That opportunities for islands, opportunities for perhaps medians that might separate traffic and allow people to reverse direction if there isn't an immediate impact on homes or businesses in certain sections, as well as the interest that the city has had in past plans for active transportation or bicycle and pedestrian connections. I did a quick screenshot from the city's GIS. Those two green dots are measuring the right-of-way width. Maine DOT has about 180 feet of right-of-way, and that ranges from maybe 150 to up to 200 feet between the lake and the Turner Town line. Plenty of room for travel lanes if they're 12 feet each, a center turn lane if it's 14 feet. So we want DOT, if they're going to look at taking up pavement or changing the configuration, to ensure we're looking at how do we get a shared use path that could be separated for safety that would allow people on a future Southern Link trail to cross Route 4 and eventually make their way to the state park in Turner. So not the safety project, obviously, we want to make sure folks traveling on Route 4 are safe, but we want to take this opportunity to drive DOT to look at some of the broader community planning objectives. Coming south, I don't like calling it the mall area, so I just call it the Mount Auburn neighborhood. Maybe someone with a marketing degree could come up with a better descriptor. We have scoped an evaluation of this area of the city from just west of Park Avenue to, in essence, just east of Center Street, Route 4, including the ramps with Veterans Bridge. It is an area that is fairly inefficient with respect to movement of traffic. There's a lot of pavement there, and with some of the zoning changes that you folks have approved, general business district allowing for more impact on those lots for infill development. Those streets really can't accommodate the kind of infill development on the residential side that may be of interest over time to mix residential with commercial. It's not comfortable to walk in most cases. On some sections of road, DOT actually prohibits having sidewalks or bike lanes because it's control of access. So we want to be able to reimagine that area. So as future projects come forward, we can either make segment by segment improvements, or if there's some significant economic opportunity if we change the infrastructure, there are federal funds that we could compete for. So I'm going to just give you one example. Kings Road or Kingsway, depends on which map you look at. It is a private road. It is owned by Albertsons, who is the owner of Shaw's in that plaza. Anyone who's driven Kingsway from Turner Street, it drops you into the Shaw's parking lot, where you then need to take a right and then a left and then a left, and then you're in a jug handle just off of Bradman, and it's very complicated. It does not provide for efficient east-west movement. If someone's at Target and wants to go to Hobby Lobby, we're either awkwardly navigating them through that or sending them to the Veterans Bridge, which is already congested and full of high crash locations. So this is an example where we've talked to the property owners, Mr. Schott, the corporate folks at Albertsons. They're open to how might we think about making a more efficient east-west connection there. Both parties would benefit in this case. We would make it safer. You could introduce pedestrian movement, and they likely would get new frontage lots on an improved travel way. So those are the types of examples where we want to, in essence, retrofit this area as part of an evaluation. An RFP that we have out right now, I'm hopeful that we'll have some solid bids that come in next Tuesday at the bid opening. We've been working with the Maine Department of Transportation. They created a new program called the Village Partnership Initiative. They will provide up to 50 cents on the dollar in support of planning initiatives that look at safety, mobility, and supporting equity and community development. The target is really to go after some of the bigger federal grants that are in the bipartisan infrastructure law. A number of communities have worked with Maine DOT on this. Portland, Sanford, Wyndham are examples. Each of those worked with DOT and achieved grants of $30 to $40+ million. With inflation, that money does not go as far, but with that kind of order of magnitude, you can make a significant change on corridors. So this corridor, if you go to the city's website, you can certainly read the detailed scope of work. In a lot of these studies, we try to identify unique areas or nodes that we'd want some special focus on. You can't make every section of the corridor a priority, but this begins at the town line, follows Minot Avenue through the Rotary. The Rotary is included to Union Street, and then to the intersection with Turner and Center Street. We also included Court Street. Some of the key considerations here, certainly on the outer Minot Ave section, is safety and bicycle pedestrian access. I think you have a project tonight with additional residential on that corridor. You've got the investment in Blackie's, you've got Side by Each, Max Grill, you've got a neighborhood on one side. You probably, anyone who travels that corridor, I know I do, and I see people trying to walk from Petro's to Blackie's to get lunch or a snack. We really want to look at how that corridor can function for regional movement. This is not about putting a traffic signal everywhere, but how can we slow traffic down and provide access for other users that would support development. As we come into town, areas like Court Street, we want to look at intersection configurations at Court and Minot and Manly, look at signal equipment. So the Park Avenue, Court Street signal and the Minot Avenue Manly signal is an example of signals that aren't networked. They operate independently. So you can envision if we did invest in networking those signals and had a plan, we could manage timing and make it less comfortable for through traffic, as well as making some infrastructure upgrades that would make it feel less comfortable going 35 to 40 on sections of Court Street, where we want to have people going 25. The Five Corners is an area that's always been looked at. Fairview, Poland, Minot Avenue is a very tricky intersection. It's not safe for kids walking to Fairview. Sight distance is a challenge. So that's an area. It has been looked at in the past, but we want to revisit that. The Rotary, obviously, it's a 6-lane section. There's more capacity there than on the Turnpike through town. So we want to revisit, can that footprint be improved to allow for pedestrian, bike, and to support redevelopment. A number of the lots inside the Rotary are actually for sale right now, and the city zoning could certainly complement some infill there if it felt more like downtown Gateway. And Union Street, of course, is a a strange 35-mile-an-hour road that bisects. When it was built, it bisected the Powell neighborhood with the rest of downtown, revisiting either the footprint of that road or how we deal with the Turner Street, Center Street intersection. We get a lot of cut-through traffic. As some of you may see, I live off Gamage Ave. You see the stream of traffic that takes Court to Goff to Denison to Turner, because Turner, if you're on Union Street, you can't take Turner Street to the mall area. Turner Street traffic may not like that, but it is the shortest route. We can find ways to calm traffic on Turner Street, but putting all that traffic through Goff and Denison, it wasn't built for that type of cut-through, so we want to try to find some solutions. Another study similar to the Mount Auburn Mall area where we've done some scoping. Some of this is a matter of there's only so much funding, so as we've gone out to bid, we see what we have for available funding, we move the next project up, or we look for other funding partnerships. The core of downtown, there's a couple of key pieces here, and traffic really isn't the highest priority. We have a lot of undeveloped land, we have a lot of paved footprint, and it's separated by a corridor that folks don't feel safe walking, like full stop. Folks in the Esplanade who are part of Walking on Its last year that have mobility challenges, they do not go to the community concert band events because they cannot cross Court Street. Some people say take the bridge or the path under the bridge. The only ADA access would be to go to Bonnie Park. So you're asking someone in a wheelchair or with a walker to walk, 3/4 of a mile down to Bonnie Park and come back on brick sidewalks so that you can see some of those challenges. So we want to be mindful of how do we address these two intersections that are outside the window here, Mechanics Row, Court and Turner, Maine, Court and Great Falls Plaza. But we also want to think about how can we lay out some development sites in both Great Falls Plaza and on Mechanics Row. Mechanics Row right now is a one-way street. About 80% of the traffic that we see on 136 or Main Street is actually destined for Turner Street north of the Union Center intersection. So it's traffic that's using really the only way to get to the mall area coming from the south is through the heart of our downtown. So other ways we can move that traffic away from some of those key walkable districts. And in Great Falls Plaza, there's about 8 acres of city-owned land there. Not all of it is needed for parking. Not all of it is needed for a street. We've had some preliminary conversations with some of the property owners. The goal would be to evaluate how could we lay out a final street grid in that area? How do we understand the types of parking demands we would have? And then whatever's not needed for that street grid or for some parking could be structured or otherwise that the city could make available for private development and try to build an urban street grid inside of Great Falls Plaza. The most significant study that we have at the southern end of the city is, again, we'll find maybe a marketing firm. We've called it the Washington Street Corridor Study. For now, we're calling it the Little Androscoggin Gateway District. It's really looking at that area inside the box, which for context is about the size of South Portland. So it gives good appreciation for the landmass of the city of Auburn. That kind of just this area that's shown in that inset box is the size of the next largest city in the state. Washington Street, north and south, I'm sure you've all traveled it. Washington Street south, and this is all laid out. The comp plan, and former Councilor Hayes knows Washington Street has always been an area that the community has tried to find a way to convert into some kind of gateway, attractive gateway. About 75% of the traffic that's trying to get to downtown Auburn or Lewiston uses Washington Street. When DOT built Washington Street South in the 1950s, they acquired 250 feet of right-of-way, which is about the width of the Turnpike right-of-way. The original intention was that they would build a two-way controlled access facility. They never did. So what the study is modeling from a traffic perspective, from about exit 75, it will continue to the Rotary, is can we convert that southbound side to a two-way interstate spur type highway. Over 85% of the traffic on that corridor has no interest being on that corridor. It's trying to get to downtown, Farmington, Rangeley. If we can move that traffic, convert Washington Street north back to a two-way local street, and to evaluate what type of zoning. The comp plan, the future land use plan calls out a gateway form-based code district. We've leveraged some of the ARPA funds that the city council had allocated to have a land use firm assist with the transportation planning, to start to think about what might that form look like, how might that come to life in a zoning ordinance. And I would say probably by the end of October or early November, there'll be significant public process will emerge on this study. Public meetings, public websites, some design charrettes, landowner engagement. This probably has the most significant opportunity to impact the future of the city. Certainly with the work happening on the Little Androscoggin River, there's some river restoration projects, dam removals. This is really a unique corridor where the eastern boundary is a major river that in any other city they would kill to have a river like that. So much attention goes to the Maine Androscoggin River. The Little Androscoggin doesn't tend to get as much attention. So that study is expected to wrap up in the spring. It's called a pre-feasibility. This is a significant infrastructure project. We're talking about probably at least one interchange, potentially at Rodman Road, bridges and grade, separation of grade to allow traffic that wants to be on the spur to get onto the spur, and then folks who want to be on the local mixed-use walkable street would exit that corridor. There's a rough estimate, maybe 250 to 300 acres of land that could be developed. For comparison, that's about the size of the ADAPT planning area back in 2000. So it's a sizable chunk of real estate where we can look at laying out street grids or otherwise. One last piece that staff have certainly for years been thinking about how to create east-west connections. If you look at a map, New Auburn sort of forms a peninsula. You've got the Turnpike as a southern boundary, the Little Androscoggin up to the confluence is sort of the tip of that point, and then the Androscoggin. That drives a lot of traffic to High Street, to Academy, to Mill Street in New Auburn, because it can't move east-west in Auburn. So we are looking to model opportunities eventually for a Rodman Road connection that perhaps could at least get to Broad Street. And then over time, as was laid out in the comp plan, can we make a connection down to Route 136 and provide some relief where through traffic, regional traffic doesn't need to use our local streets. We can prioritize putting them on regional connector roads, and that can help with traffic calming and the like. So that should be, I had two more quick slides. I'll go fast. Airport master plan. This has not been done since 2006. The airport has a consultant that's working with us on that. Again, this fall, there will be a public process. We'll ramp up on that. We've been doing a lot of review of aircraft operations at the airport. A lot has changed at the airport since 2006. Folks may have read a lot's happened in the last couple of years, but a lot's changed since 2006. The airport is now under contract management by the City of Auburn. The board in both cities supported that approach, which I'm very optimistic is going to help us look more closely at zoning on and around the airport. How can we plan for the airport to be integrated into the business and community development goals of the city around Exit 75, which includes the intermodal. There's, for the first time in a decade, the intermodal is now active. There's active freight movement coming from Quebec with the closure of Dragon Cement in Thomaston. We've worked an arrangement to move product from Quebec to Auburn, where it's then offloaded into trucks to support the construction industry in southern Maine. The Lewiston and Auburn Railroad Company has agreed to lease the property you see on the right, which is a 12-acre undeveloped parcel for Auburn to explore expanding the intermodal to provide additional operating room. So it is an area that's obviously been zoned for a long time for heavy industrial use, and now that it's seeing active use, you'll see projects probably over the next 6 months in this area coming before you as we plan for that expansion. Now I'm done. Sorry, Madam Chair.
No, excellent, all exciting stuff. Any questions?
I have a couple. Sorry, were you going to go? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Labonte. It's clear you are very passionate and knowledgeable about this topic, and I really appreciate that. I have two questions, really one and the same. Regarding the Minot Ave, Union, Court VPI, basically our east-west, how much traffic that uses that corridor is transitory? They're just trying to get from Poland or Mechanic Falls to Lewiston or Lisbon, and they're just passing through. do you have an idea of a number or percentage of the traffic? And also the same question for north-south. How much traffic coming through the city has utilized exit 75 and they're destined for the Turner line? Like, how much of the traffic in our city, and I think you started to touch on it, it's almost sounding like a bypass kind of direction that the city might have to consider just to curb the volume that we're dealing with. And I'm just wondering how big that volume might be if you have that info.
I don't have it front of mind. I know Washington Street, we're mining a lot of that data now. DOT has a tool that they've bought access to. Anyone who uses a smartphone, they might be getting directions. They've got location services and pinging. AvCog has access to this. We've been leveraging them even to do some pre-thinking, like the Main Street traffic I mentioned. Is we want to think about what solutions might be viable before we go and spend money on a consultant. So they in essence set up a geogrid in the software to pick up traffic. If traffic's coming from the south of this box, where does it exit the box? And you can adjust that. So we will certainly, when we get into public process on those studies, have more of that information. If you read the first page of the memo, I gave the South Portland Scarborough example. Professionally, I would never recommend the city pursue any kind of bypass. That's been in previous comp plans. Can you take Hotel Road? All we're doing is pushing our ability to manage traffic further away, let alone putting it closer to our drinking water supply or another high-value natural resource at Taylor Pond. But I do think we need to think about where do we want to have north-south movement? Where is mobility a priority? Where is community access a priority? So, Washington Street, fine. You'll reach a point maybe in the Rotary where, I'm sorry, welcome to downtown Auburn, and it's going to move a little bit slower for a bit, and then you're going to reach a point on Center Street, and we're going to give you mobility back. We're seeing a lot of traffic shifts to Grace Lawn, to Park Ave, all because of the inefficient use of Center Street. So all these things, like a stress ball, kind of push themselves around. So DOT's been very supportive. Certainly the environment to build new highways. Anyone who follows what's happening in Gorham, a 4-mile highway for $250 million, that's probably not the best use. But if we can think about strategically where we want to have mobility and where we don't want to have that mobility, especially around our neighborhoods, that's the goal. So you've hit on it. It's the north, south, east, west. If there's gaps, that's where that Rodman Road piece. If we can't get traffic from Minot Avenue that's looking to get towards exit 80, so to do that, they're meandering through our downtown. That's the traffic we want to pull out, and that's what's going to give us more flexibility to change Court Street, for example.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Comments?
I'm sorry. I guess I have one. The corridor, the Washington Ave corridor, and I might be misremembering this, but I thought didn't that need Maine DOT approval because you'd have to be widening the bridge over the Little Androscoggin, or do we get that approval? Because it sounded like we were going to be seeing that potentially come up soon.
Yeah, so DOT's involvement, the Turnpike, and AvCog were our federal planning. The first steps of this was getting DOT's support, getting AvCog, which included Lewiston, to vote in support. There would be additional bridges, bridge widenings as part of this. So DOT is a partner because ultimately their support will determine if we can get the federal funds to build it.
That's what I was wondering, was if we haven't got that funding yet.
No, the pre-feasibility work will look at, are there fatal flaws? Like, does it just not work from a traffic perspective to achieve what we want? Are there environmental constraints that would really make it a challenge to do that? And is there community support? So if we work through this process and there is community support, it's technically feasible, it's environmentally feasible. My hope is by the end of next year, we're identifying how this might be built in phases and how we might go and find some of that funding.
Thanks.
Question. With regard to the signals and the movement of traffic, I noticed that there were a number of lights that weren't on the signal ADMS, but there's also a bunch that were considered unstable. So what does that mean, and what's the impact of potentially getting all of our signals on a computer system?
So the signals that we're showing as unstable are now back online. So that was a screenshot from the first review of here's where the system sits. The software program had expired 3 years prior, so they had to upgrade the software. There were significant technical challenges, and because of staff turnover at AvCog, we hadn't managed our way through that. So all the signals are online. We're trying to work through creating a PM system and understanding what the capacity is. You know, there aren't a lot of, I think Lewiston has 7 or 8 times the amount of staff that can be deployed to work on signal issues. And the 2 that Auburn also have to do inspections and do electrical work elsewhere in the city. So it's a challenge. But I think that's something where in the future, and whether it's through ordinance or some administrative policy, determining when does the city want to have signals installed if warranted, or does the city want to have a position that signals are not the preferred solution depending on location, where if a roundabout could work, while it might take up a little bit bigger footprint, certainly it is safer, requires much less maintenance, and can keep traffic moving. So if you're trying to go for Inflation Reduction Act funding to reduce emissions, they're actually funding conversion of signal intersections to roundabouts using EPA dollars. So we also want to make sure we're looking at every flavor of money we might be able to pull in.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to talk about the next 2 items on the agenda. Item number 5, the public hearing site plan review for the Fielding Properties on the hangar, and then also for the public hearing special exception for the, I'm sorry, I have a cold, so I'm like a little heavy in the head, so forgive me on this one. Also for the multifamily unit. So I'll hand it over to staff to talk about these 2 different items, and ultimately the end is going to be that we're going to postpone these to the next meeting, which is on the 8th, but I will let staff kind of talk about why we're doing that, and then we can seek a motion on individually on each one of these.
Yeah, we realized today that we had properly sent abutters notices. We did send those out, but we did not send the Sun Journal notification that's required. So they didn't have the full proper public notice for a public hearing tonight. This afternoon, John and Megan talked to applicants, and the applicants are comfortable with not coming tonight and being here for the October 8th meeting. We would have had to do a new public notice in order to have even an earlier meeting. We talked about that as a possibility. One of the applicants has to be here on the 8th anyways, and the other one was comfortable with waiting till the 8th. So staff's recommending that you vote to postpone these 2 items to that meeting. We were sort of playing it by ear to see if we had members of the public here for those items. And if we did, then we would have asked you to give them an opportunity to speak on those so they didn't feel like they wasted their time. And I'm not sure, are you here for either of those 2 items, the site plan reviews? Okay, so staff recommends that you postpone those to the October meeting. We will do a new public notice, both the abutters and the newspaper for that meeting.
Okay, excellent. So at this time, I would seek a motion to postpone item number 5, the public hearing site plan review for the hangars, to a date certain, which is October 8th.
So moved?
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent, motion carries. Okay, so the next item, I would seek a motion to postpone to a date certain, which is October 8th. The item 6 on the agenda, public hearing special exception for the multifamily units.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Excellent, all those in favor? Okay, motion carries.
Quick question for staff. Do you want us to keep our packets? So, okay.
Thank you. Alrighty, next item on the agenda is a workshop. I will hand it over to staff. Just gonna read it to you.
Website.
So this is a workshop related to additional Lake Auburn watershed text amendments. Specifically, this is focused around ag and forestry uses, farming, agriculture. Next slide. We'll go over, the agenda is, why are there more changes? Definitions for agriculture and forestry uses. There's a lot of questions on some of the actual definitions that we had, so we added a lot more of that. We added a section for fertilizers and pesticides, so those were text additions. In addition, we added some language for erosion control, tree clearing, and forestry. We'll get into all the details of that. And then setback requirements, particularly for, disturbing land or tilling land for forestry practices. We set up a map essentially for staff and for the public to use as buffers in areas of concern. Next slide. If anybody at any time has any questions on the information that we're covering, I'm going to probably keep it at, 5,000 to 10,000. But if you want to bring it down into a specific section of the ordinance that you want to talk about, we could certainly zoom into that and get detailed on that. So why more changes? So there was hobby farms and non-hobby farms. We essentially got rid of those two terms. Essentially, one is to protect drinking water, obviously, as Lake Auburn's our public water supply. But the other piece of that is the right to food laws that kind of drives a lot of these conversations and why it's important that we should, if people own land in the watershed, they should be able to put. Have a garden, have a farm, have the right to do that. But because it's in the public water supply, in the watershed, we should have safe boards. And that's really what the focus was, is just balancing those two uses, and then, hopefully delivering a product that staff can use, the public can use so they can, find their way through this ordinance and make it a little bit easier. Just a little bit of background. This was a council order back in January, multiple meetings with the Lake Auburn stakeholders group, meeting over 10 times, a lot of edit changes. There was talk about 15 different edits where we've landed. We actually had the drinking water program reviewed this. We had the Forest Service. We'll get into some of the details about the Forest Service because we're introducing language that is a little bit stiffer in the watershed than what the state law is. So we have a process to go through for them with that. Specific definitions. And we'll get into those, specifically agricultural uses, animal units, clear cutting, invasive species, livestock, NRCS, that's an acronym. It's the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We'll get into some of the specifics, what they do, and what we're asking for them. NWI, again, I think a lot of the planning board members here are familiar with that acronym, but that's a National Wetlands Inventory. Fertilizers, pests, pesticides, poultry, soil tests, summer dormancy, what plants are not doing much, and then tillage, and then total N being nitrogen. So those are impacts. That could be overall impacts to the lake, right? So we want to keep out the P and we want to keep out the N. That's the phosphorus and nitrogen. That's what drives the growth for algae and affects water quality overall. So that's what our focus was. I mentioned this already. The new text allows farming, but keeps some pretty define safe boards for that operation for water quality protections. We're going to get specific into waste and nutrient management plans. That's not all for new, that's not only for new farms, which basically aren't allowed anymore, but existing farms. You know, those really will need to have, if they have any kind of animal units, they're going to have to get a nutrient management plan over a certain acreage. We'll get into some of those details. We set limits on poultry animal units. Some of it is we're adopting some language that we already had in our definitions, and others we're adding a number for the number of chickens or poultry. Poultry is a better, more broader term, essentially for birds. Tillage setbacks from 100 to 250 feet. So we're any of the tilled land that we have there, we're really making that buffer a little bit bigger. We've developed a nice map to do that, and for staff to use and the public to use. We're adopting some of the new language for fertilizers and pesticides. Again, this is all driven through, we know that, oftentimes if you've got a farm and you're trying to produce stuff, you may have to apply these things. And not only does that affect the farming or the forestry or those types of practices, but it also affects the homeowners' uses out there. So just making people aware that they need to think about what they're putting on the ground and how that affects water quality. So we're again adding some more safe boards to water quality. I mentioned a little bit about this with Forest Service, clear cutting, limiting 2 acres on a 2-acre tract. So state requirement, the minimum was 5, so we're making that a little bit more stringent. And then clear cutting, limiting to 25% of the total lot if they're under 20 acres. We added state forestry BMP language. BMPs are best management practices. We use that often for erosion and sediment control. They have, and we'll show you some BMPs that we have in our slides. I had a picture of that, of cording and how we limit the amount of impact to the ground by these big machines that are out there, these track vehicles that are doing the timber harvesting nowadays. So we added some very clear language from the state manual. And then the adopted 20 rule by the Maine Forest Service. And that's a policy under the Maine Forest Protection Act legislation. So pretty straightforward. I think it's, I think they're all, to me, it all helps out staff, it helps out the public. And at the same time, it allows some, I think, additional freedoms, but at the same time, thinking about, how can we protect the lake at the same time. So there was a lot of thought that went into it. We had, on the groups, we had, we had farmers sitting at the table. We had, concerned public citizens about forestry practices sitting at the table. The water district certainly was there, and their group, we had them sitting at the table. So we had a lot of well-rounded people that was providing input, and I think what we got was what we have here in front of us is a solid document with a lot more clarity. I'll just go through the definitions. I'm not going to read them to you precisely, but again, I'll just go through them again. Agricultural uses, animal units, clear cutting, invasive species, livestock, NRCS, NWI, fertilizer, pesticides, poultry, soil tests, summer dormancy, tillage, and total end. This just really identifies all the language that we use that's related to farming and agricultural uses that may be common language to people that are in the farming, but not necessarily staff or people that are trying, or code people that are trying to enforce these rules. So I think it's good to have this base language so everybody understands, well, what does livestock mean? And, what does summer dormancy mean? But if anybody has any questions about the definitions, I'm happy to answer them, and we can drill down into it at this point.
Actually, a couple, but I'll probably scatter them in a little bit. I guess when I first looked at the agenda, I said, oh, where it's in the workshop to identify the standards governing tree cutting and timber harvesting. I'm like, oh, that's just relatively straightforward. Shouldn't be that difficult. But when I started digging into the actual packet, it clearly was the governing ag uses was dropped from the agenda. I guess when this gets to public hearing, I would make sure that we leverage the full proposal language as to what it is, so that we make sure that people are aware of that it's not just timber cutting, because there's a lot here, especially with the removal of hobby farms. So for me, I have a lot of questions around, so if I'm a homeowner within the watershed and I want to fertilize my lawn, I want to plant a garden for just myself. The way I read this, you have to have a plan, you've got to have a wastewater, plan, you've got to have this, that, it has to be approved. Maybe I misread it, but if you could talk to the impact of the traditional homeowner and not necessarily the farm, because to me, this extends to much beyond a farm when I read it. And thank you.
Yep, no, I think your comments are warranted. I will, in the PowerPoint, I do cover some of that language, specifically for, gardens for under 1,000 square feet. There's some specific language in there. And I do apologize for, the very basic piece there on the agenda. I do get that, and I understand that was not intentional. We will clarify that and make sure that that's more clear and more robust in terms of a quick paragraph through the agenda for the next time. I can certainly respect that.
And you touched on hobby farm. I just want to point out that was a major part of this discussion. We had in the last version tried to distinguish between what types of farm would cause the highest concern by sort of having that lower level as a hobby farm, the higher level as a commercial farm. A lot of the discussion, because a commercial farm would typically be larger than a hobby farm, a lot of the discussion that ended with this recommendation was centered around that, and really that animal farms, whether they're hobby or commercial, have the potential for the biggest impacts because of the nutrients that they create. And a lot of the work was trying to separate the types of farms, where it didn't really matter if you were selling anything or not, or if it was a hobby, but trying to regulate the highest risks to the water quality.
Excellent, thank you. And I guess, John, if you would, could you help me identify where that garden language is? Or maybe you'll touch on it during one of the slides.
Yep, it's actually the next slide I've got.
Okay, there you go. Good segue, I guess.
So it's in this paragraph right here on this sheet. It's agricultural uses. I'll just go down kind of, this is the bullet points that I have are kind of in order in terms of where you might find them. I suppose that if I was perfect at my job, I would have the reference to the section in my talking points, but I don't. But I just wanted to, as a, essentially as a workshop, I just wanted to go over kind of everything at like I said, at 5,000 or 10,000, and then we can drill into anything specific. But allows farming in the watershed with defined safe boards for water quality protection. So waste and nutrient management plans by NRCS with required buffers of 250 feet So I will say that with a caveat that the language basically requires farms to comply with obtaining a waste and nutrient management plan that raise livestock and poultry by June 30th, 2027. So regardless of the size, if they have animals, they're going to have to do a nutrient management plan if you have an animal. But if you just have a crop farm that's under 1,000, so this is the garden situation. If you have a crop farm under 1,000 square feet, you're not required to do any of this. You're not required for a phosphorus plan, you're not required for a nutrient management plan, nothing like that. And that's in number 3. If you read through it, it is a little bit of a mouthful. I will say that, and that's the reason why I took the time to kind of break it down individually as we talk through these. But the provisions of this subsection 2A shall apply to all new and expanded agricultural uses of land within the Lake Auburn Watershed District for those agricultural uses that exist on July 1st, 2024. The property owner or lessee shall comply with the requirements of section 2A 1B no later than June 30th. So then we've got to look up on the above ones and showing that, you know, you've got to get a nutrient management plan by NRCS, and that if it is over 1,000 square feet of cleared area for a garden area, then you would have to do a nutrient management plan as well. These approvals, so as you do these nutrient management plans, these approvals are required by LawPac and city staff with the NRCS input. So NRCS will do these nutrient management plans. It doesn't matter if they're an entity that's driving any business or not. They will do that for the watershed. It was something that was brought in a meeting that we had with Chuck Penny at the state level at NRCS, and they said that they would provide that service. The local district in Lewiston would provide that service for any landowner that had a garden over 1,000 square feet, if required. So, by our ordinance. So, any questions regarding this information?
How is June 30th, 2027 arrived at?
So it's going to take a while for NRCS to respond to the nutrient management plans, and we wanted to provide a buffer in there to make sure that we get those implemented. 1, identify all the farms, and then 2, to get them on board and get the connection between the landowner and NRCS. And you know, at the end of the day, they are the federal government. It is a process, and it takes time. So that's why we gave the buffer on the timing.
Yeah, I'm just curious about June 30th versus like 1/1/2028, or you know what I mean? Like it's just kind of like June.
Yeah, I think initially that discussion was to try to give a few years from when we were working
I'm
on
all
it,
about
but I
a few
think
years, but I just was curious how
where
June was
where
arrived
it's
at.
been delayed to adoption being later than June 30th, you could look at delaying the end date too.
Yeah, we were writing this back in June. So
Yep.
We've come up with something before where they had a hard date and we just said like 2 or 3 years from passage
sure,
or
sure,
some,
sure.
you know, from
Yeah,
adoption.
yeah.
So maybe that, the other, for me, this whole 2A is a word salad. And just,
Which one is?
2A, the agriculture use section. I mean, if it really only applies to land of 1,000 square feet or more, then I guess I don't understand why we can't just make the language simpler to state that that's the case, rather than having to say it in 2A4 that it only applies if it's over 1,000. Or doesn't, or actually it's the negative. It doesn't apply if it's, you know, I guess I'm always trying to make these things easier to read for the general member of public? And if that's really what it says, then is there a better way to say it?
I had same question, and I talked to Eric about it. He's better at reading the stuff than I am, so I don't disagree with what you're saying. But it is terms from a legal perspective, it's solid as a rock. But for the common person, maybe there could be work there. But I don't. We did have legal review on this, but we could certainly consider something. If we could come up with something more creative or more clear, we could certainly present that at the public hearing.
Yeah, that's good feedback. We, as staff, once we have a draft from a committee, will not make changes without some directive, but you're helping us with taking a look at that.
Like somewhere at the top, say, if you're under 1,000 square feet, move on. Unless you have animals, because that's the other one.
I do know what you're saying, where it's in the negative instead of the positive. Instead of saying if it is 1,000, it would be. It says if it's not, it would not apply if it is not more than 1,000 feet. That was the suggested language from legal. To do it in the negative instead of saying if it is 1,000, it will apply. It says if it's not 1,000, then this does not apply.
Yeah, it's more of the order of the language. So you state what you want, and then what you state what you want or require, and then you reference it if you need to bring it back up again. You don't repeat it, and that's the reason why it's an organizational order that you find in writing statutes and ordinances. That is it's kind of a legal process piece. That keeps it cleaner. We don't repeat language throughout the ordinance that makes things very wordy or maybe sometimes means nothing. And that's the reason why it's set up that way structurally. But it's hard to it is challenging to follow. But you got to train your mind to think that way. And that once you get the process down, it's not too bad. But it's certainly something that you've got to chew on for a little bit, understand the process.
We can see if there's a way to work that in earlier on.
Also, with regard to the fertilizer references, really, that's really restricted to ag uses. My ability as a homeowner to work with a lawn care company to do spring and fall fertilizer on my lawn, is that impacted by this, or is that not impacted by this?
I have a slide. We'll get there. But to answer the question, yes, it will impact the individual landowner, and we'll get there on the slide.
Thank you.
Yep. Anything around these items here that we kind of highlighted through agricultural uses? Okay, next slide. So C really sets limits on animal units in the watershed. The biggest takeaway here is that we're referencing our section 60-2. What I did was, rather than, well, what is in 60-2, I've added it here. It's not necessarily, you're not going to find the 60-2 language, but it's really, this is the definition for farm livestock, and it references the amount of animal units, just so you know what we're talking about, when you're reading through this, so you kind of understand it. The other piece of this is that we added the number, specific language on animal units for poultry permitted in the watershed. And then that's at 15 units per acre, not to exceed 150 animal units. So that, again, it kind of could have there and what they couldn't have there. All right, next slide.
Thank you, Megan.
I wasn't sure if you were trying to just digest the information or anything. I was just trying
It's
to give you
riveting.
enough time. Yeah, all right. Next one here is the tillage setbacks of 250 feet. So really, this is identifying all the resources on the map. This is very similar to the map that we did for septic systems and citing those, and but this one's a little bit different. The other one's 400 feet. This one's 250. We increased that from 100 to 250. And again, this was a little bit of flexibility to allow some farming in the watershed and to identify the areas that have the most sensitive resources that really go back to the lake or could potentially go back to the lake, and identify where those buffers are. There is an updated map that we're going to be using that's included in our packets, that we're going to, again, use as reference from staff. Any questions? Okay, continuing on, this basically says manure storage requirements. What does that look like? And I think the pictures here, this is some examples of what NRCS does. You've got to have an impervious surface on the bottom and then a rooftop cover for any manure that's in the watershed, regardless if it's existing or new. This is kind of going to be the new standard on how we do things. I think if we look at the picture on the right, it's kind of an interesting thing where you put the newer stuff on in one bay, and then as it breaks down and it turns into a good component that you could potentially spread back out in particular areas or sell it. I think selling is probably a better thing here because a lot of the manure storage spreading is not allowed in the watershed. But this is a value-add product for people that are doing agriculture or horse farming or whatever in the watershed that they could eventually sell it. So I just like the picture on the right, showcases that. This is a good way to add value add and to convince, you always want to maybe go in there with soft gloves with a conversation with a farmer, but this might be value add at the end of the day, that they could sell that as compost for folks with gardens and things like that. So good use of resources. And NRCS, if you have $2,000 more commodity sales on your farm, they'll pay for this. They'll pay for this manure storage facility. So exactly how it's designed right here.
Are those photos, are those current properties in Auburn, or are those just examples?
They're not current properties in Auburn, but they are current farms that NRCS has worked on. These are credit from Chuck Penny at NRCS. He's the technical services director for them. I went to college with Chuck.
How long does it take for one bay to break down for a farmer to sell it?
I think I don't know, if Megan may know this better than I do, but it depends on the animal waste, actually. One animal is different from the other depending on what they eat and how they digest the food, so.
I
maybe
just
Megan-
didn't know how long a farmer would have to sit on it to sell it.
It really depends on how often they're turning it with their tractor for that process to break it down. We have a herd of around 60 goats, and within a year, the manure and the hay and the shavings and all the materials that are in our compost is usually pretty good to go into the garden. But 2 years is better. Depends on heat and weather and all that stuff and how it breaks down. But yeah, at least a year they probably have that nice looking pile sitting there for everyone to look at.
Okay, this is the guideline. These are the guidelines for fertilizer and pesticide use and applications. I can say that we looked at many communities that have this type of fertilizer and pesticide use ordinance requirements. So a lot of this is adopted language from other towns and cities across the state. It's pretty standard language. A lot of it references, Dave, I think you had a question about, licensed pesticide applicators and things like that for homeowners. It references that in here, brings those state laws into effect. This one is going to be, in terms of from a enforcement piece, this one would be tough for the city. But I think it's good to have in here for language because it's a good educational piece. If we have something that we can positively identify that it's, more applied fertilizer or pesticide use than was required, we have something to go back and look at and to, again, put safeguard and borders on the process for protecting the lake, while giving, people the ability to do that. And what's the process to do that? What's good to use and what's good not to use? I will say this, that, from somebody that lives in a rural area like myself, these rules apply to wells, and how that affects wells and your personal public water supply if you're in a rural area. I think that's the case that we find in the watershed, is that there's a lot of rural area, there's not a lot of public water use for the individual landowner out there. So this helps them as well. It could be a good guideline for them if they're choosing to apply pesticides or fertilizer on their land for whatever reason.
I was thinking the same thing when you said kind of an enforcement perspective. I was like, wow, this is pretty dense language. Like, where do you, like, how do you kind of check all the boxes? So, but I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Any questions? Okay, last piece. This is really the piece that that we got hung up on in June when we came across the new state statute that said that, we've got to go back to the Maine State Forest Service for any ordinance changes. There's some very strong language in there that says we've got to go back to the State Forest Service for any ordinance change and essentially have their approval. So at this point, it took a little bit of time to coordinate a meeting. Forest Service very busy in the summer, obviously, but in addition to that, people have do vacations, and just the timing at the end of June, when we got to the point where we identified this and to actual plan it, it was longer than we had anticipated. But surprisingly surprised that we actually did it in the amount of time to get the state forestry regional folks in the room. And I put this in blue, the Rule 20, that was from them, that we need to reference this Rule 20 that was adopted. So those are essentially their rules to go by. If we're going to reference the Maine State Forest Service, they wanted us to add this language. I will say that if the planning board does not have any real change in this, we will now send this language as the final language. They had a cursory review and they were completely 100% fine with it, but they wanted the final language that, I told them that we're going to meet with planning board. If we have any changes, we'll let you know. But at that point, we can set we have a 45-day requirement for the public hearing to the final reading for that approval. So we're going to span this approval through council, through planning board, and then council through a 45-day period. We kind of laid it out if everything lines up perfectly to meet the state requirement for public notice for 45 days and posting that and letting folks know. So,
Yeah, the only question I have, and it's more of a question about your PowerPoint, is when I look at your bullets, the last bullet is adopted Rule 20 by the MFS policy under the Maine Forest Practices Act. So in all the other bullets, it references 20, right? So is that the overarching rule? And then underneath that rule, it's a clear cutting limit to 2 acres on a 20-acre tract. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the act, and then you've got some of the specifications underneath it.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
So basically, they're the state BMP language, and then they have their own rule, and then the policy. So the rule is the legislation's the baseline, and then from the legislation it drives the rules.
Okay.
So that's.
I guess if you ever redid this, I would just put that at the top and then have the other ones underneath. That's all.
Right, but those are separate items, not
Okay.
not the same as the actual Maine State Forestry.
Okay. That was my
reference.
question, so I appreciate that.
Yep.
I have a language question on it. The last sentence, why does it say from time? Could you strike from time to time and just have it read the director or designee may require and so forth, and just strike that from time to time section? I think it reads the same and leaves less, makes it simpler.
Just strike out from time to time.
That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I agree with Riley.
It just still says that they may, so from time to time makes it more confusing, I think.
Yep, that's good. Good feedback. So this picture on the bottom here, that's actually quartering. That's a best management practice for timber harvester. They lay this down to protect the earth, not to disturb the earth. So that's a best management practice example of what we would expect to see if we had logging operation occur in the watershed.
All right. Are you going to wrap it up?
Yep, that's all I have.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Any more comments for staff on this? Do you have what you need from us?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Perfect. So if I'm not seeing anything else from the board, I'll move on to the next workshop.
So we chatted about this one as a workshop item last month, It's to allow for shipping containers, Connex boxes, those sorts of things for storage uses. We have a lot of these in the city already. Last month, we reviewed Bear Self Storage, who has a lot of these on their lot. We just want to create some language to regulate these to make it easier for staff to be able to track where they are and check all those boxes. So last month, you gave us some really great suggestions. They're bulleted in the staff report, and we did our best to incorporate all of those into a draft that we gave to you. So I'm hoping that everyone had a chance to look at the draft and kind of let us know if we missed anything or if there's anything else that you'd like added to it. And then we'd like to give it to City Council. So just looking for feedback from the planning board and whether or not you feel comfortable to schedule a public hearing for the next meeting and start that process with City Council.
I have one addendum, and it's page 2 of 2, item 15, the very last statement. I was thinking it might be a good idea to include not just agricultural and industrial uses, but also, excuse me, recreational. I'm thinking of Tabor's, Roy's Driving Range, Lost Valley, things like that, where facilities that could be seasonal use facilities might have a need to store things. And I thought that might be a good idea to include recreational thing with those top 3 in mind. I don't know if they have them, but I wouldn't want to exclude them if they do have them. That's my thought.
I was actually at Lost Valley today, and I did see one.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
well,
could that be classified as an industrial use though, if they're using it for their business?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I guess it would depend on what the,
I'll have to
What
look
the
at the
ci-
definition of recreational because I don't want to get into like, recreational vehicles and those sorts of things if we add that, but we can look and see what would make the most sense for those types of.
well, yeah, I would just say that because I was thinking about businesses or facilities that they are recreation based, like Tabor's and Roy's Driving Range and Lost Valley, that they should probably also be included. But that's my perspective and open for discussion.
Well, it's interesting that it's allowed for agricultural and industrial uses versus allowed in the zones. I'm just curious, is is there a difference between, or are they pretty much one and the same? We reference agricultural uses versus allowed in the agricultural and industrial zones.
Yeah, I think if we reference the zone, then even every single family home in the ag or industrial zone could also do that, and that's not what we were trying to achieve.
Fair enough.
Any questions for staff on this one?
I guess just for full clarification, we're only talking Connex boxes being allowed in commercial, industrial areas or zones, not residential.
Correct.
Okay. Everyone good? Alrighty, at this time, I would open it up for public comment. You would like to come forward, state your name, your address. You have 5 minutes. We good? All right, seeing no one come. The next item on the agenda is miscellaneous upcoming agenda items. We already know we have 2 agenda items, right, scheduled for October 8th, the 2 that we did not get to today. Any other items?
I think you'll have one additional hangar project at the airport that was not on the agenda tonight as well.
Okay, that's fun. Something different. As opposed to multifamily units. All right, anything else?
Well,
Yeah, we'll have public hearing for the ag and forestry piece, and then this shipping containers.
I'm sorry?
The public hearing for ag and
Okay.
forestry, and then the shipping container,
Okay, perfect.
these two
Be
that we
curious
just
if we
covered.
get anyone.
Yeah, I guess with regard to the shipping containers and the Connex boxes, we had those things that we had asked about, and that there might be some changes needed in language. I see office spaces, manufacturing houses, so we're looking at 14. I take that back. I found it.
Oh, in the staff report, you mean?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, looking at the staff report in the background, where the reference to some of the things that we had asked about with regard to limiting the size and length of containers, and it's there. It's on page 1 of 2, number 14. So I got it. I found it.
I have kind of a curiosity of my own, and I was wondering if it could be a future agenda item, maybe not for October, maybe down the road. But with the ag zone and how that's been changed for ag zone housing, people being able to build in the ag zone, I'm gaining curiosity about how many inquiries have been made to build within the ag zone. How many of them have been approved? How many have been declined?
Really?
How much interest in building in the ag zone has been generated since things have changed? If denials have happened, why? The governing board in charge of approving or denying applications to build within the ag zone. I just thought that might be nice information to share.
Because we had limited to 5, I think. 3. Was it 3 or 5?
That's in the watershed.
In the water.
That's homes in the watershed. New homes in the watershed.
We didn't limit in the ag zone?
No.
And your timing's
limited
good.
in the
because-
watershed. No new homes in the watershed. But
It's all good. We did a lot.
Your timing's good to ask that question too, because it sounds like there will probably be a council mayor created committee to help define how we interpret the ordinance for what's legitimate ag use, so we can pull that stuff together as part of both discussions.
Yeah, okay, so I was wondering if any interest has been spurned.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
If so, have there been applications? If so, how many? How
Yep.
many have been approved? How many have denied? Why have they been denied?
We can pull that
Great,
and share it
thank
with
you.
you.
Yeah,
But there
and-
has been
and
more
I-
interest than usual, and we've approved more than usual.
Well, I'll just kind of parlay off of what you were saying. So exactly, like that's the data that's going to be used, hopefully, by city council, right, then to inform the overall application and whatever initiative they want to do with it, because that's what you need. You need information and data to be able to define things. So
And we've had at least one I can think of that was denied for being insufficient. I think the ones that were there's more that were insufficient, but in the discussions, they eventually decided not to put forward a final application.
Is city staff the deeming body that can approve or decline, or are there secondary bodies regarding that decision?
We're taking feedback from the Ag Committee, but ultimately it's a decision that staff has to make, which was one of the things during that discussion that we were a little hesitant on taking on without more details. But ultimately, staff has to make those decisions. And then if we're uncomfortable approving or denying whatever our decision is, it's appealable to the Board of Appeals, and that's sort of our fallback if we don't think it meets it.
do you run it by legal? Your decision to deny?
Not every time, no. Sometimes it's pretty easy.
Okay.
It's, there's so little there that we know that if we brought it to a room of 50 people, most of them would agree that this is not an agricultural use.
Thank you very
I'll
much.
just give you an example. There is a lot of parcels that come up for sale, and it's a daily question multiple times. So, Tim, you're amazing to ask that question. It's crazy. But so just one example. We have it's 0.40 acres. So you do the math, and that's 17,000 square feet. So they don't even qualify. They don't even qualify under the subsurface wastewater law to put a septic system in. It's a very rural area. We get inquiries about that little lot in the south end of Auburn almost every day because it's for sale, and it's a attractive price to people, but it would be hard pressed to get an agricultural use on 17,000 square feet. And to get a home there, it's almost impossible. There's a variance process that would have to be approved by the state under the subsurface wastewater rules, but that's just an example of a call that I got today that even our code officers take a lot of those calls too, so we talk about them on the daily.
Great, thank you. I just thinking, ended up sometime in the future, I know there's a lot on your plate every meeting, but to see those numbers and get an appreciation and to see if we've missed something or if something's working really well, if something needs to be refined, the decision-making
I really
bodies.
like that.
Things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, anything else before we adjourn? Okay, seeing none, I'd seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent. Have a good night. Happy Taco Tuesday. Amanda.